everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm the Vice President of Artistic Affairs, and I want to welcome you to Anderson Ranch. We have two wonderful speakers for tonight. Before we get started, if you have a cell phone, could you please shut it off or silence it? And then tomorrow, and also this is really exciting for all of us at the ranch because it's the beginning of summer. This kicks off our entire summer workshop season. So welcome to the ranch. Let's see. So we have two wonderful speakers for tonight. Tomorrow morning at 8:45, we have an all-ranch orientation here in Shermer. So please come. It'll be about a 15-minute orientation about the programs for the week, and then you'll be able to follow your studio coordinators to the studios and do a short orientation there and kind of get started. Our first speaker tonight is Esther Macy Nooner. Esther is our studio coordinator for photography and new media. She received her MFA in photography from the University of Arkansas School of Art in 2018. She has participated in artist in residencies in the National Park System and most recently at the Byrne College of Art in Ballyvaughan, Ireland. If you saw the way it was spelled, you would stutter too. Her work has been exhibited nationally and is currently on view in Carbondale right now at the launch pad. So if you're in town for the week and you have a car, I would definitely encourage you to go down to Carbondale to the launch pad. There's a two-person exhibition, and Esther has some wonderful work in there, which you probably will see tonight in the lecture. She spent much of her childhood exploring coastal and rural terrains that provided a fundamental belief in the necessity and importance of nature to human beings. Historic photographers and travel influence her research and studio practice. I'm really excited to present Esther tonight. Please welcome Esther to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. It could be participatory. You can say good evening back. That's right. Let's see. So glad to be kicking off the guest lecture series for the summer, although I'm not a guest. This is actually my home. Oh, hey, there's me. So my name's Esther. I'm the studio coordinator for photography and new media. I'm very happy to present my work tonight. As Andrew said, I do have a show in Carbondale, if you guys can go check it out. I do want to start just because my work is about nature and landscape, that just acknowledging that the land that we stand on was not originally our own, and that as a white person from with European descent, that my relationship to land is complex, but at the same time extremely simple. So part of the reason why I care so much about nature and our relationship to nature is because it was instilled in me from a very young age. This is my family farm. It's my favorite place on this earth. And one day I was sitting in the sunroom talking to my grandfather, who was like 94 at the time. And he said, we were talking about something that needed to be done. I don't know, trash. We needed to do some sort of repair. And he said, well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to leave it for the next generation. And I thought, what a way to think. And so that really got me thinking about the future, what landscape might look like in the next 50 to 20 years. And then I went to grad school. And I'm going to start with my thesis work just because it was a lot of hard work and I did a lot of traveling for it. And it's kind of what really set me in the studio practice that I have now. So the body of work was called Modified Landscapes, the Nature of Representation, and it really it's about nature and our relationship to the landscape, but it's also really about the medium of photography equally as much as it is the content. So I these are just some install shots. I went to Iceland in between my years in grad school, and I was so captivated by how they respect nature way more than we do here in America, just to say it like it is. And they refuse to have power lines. Everything's buried. Nothing obstructs their view of nature. And I really kind of took all of those ideals to heart. And then I came back and I had this large bank of photographs, and I was really disappointed in how they looked when I returned to my studio, because they were just on this tiny little screen and they didn't do the space justice. So then I started to think about the photograph and experience, and how to elevate the experience of the viewer with the images that I brought back. And I really started to really think about the photograph as an object rather than the romantic ideologies that have been historically slapped on landscape representations. When you think about the sublime or the romantic, and these photographs have been historically thought of as a portal into another place, or a window of yourself. And so I really wanted to break that expectation, and I wanted to really challenge the frame itself. And I did so in a lot of experimental ways. This piece was printed on vinyl, an adhesive vinyl, so it stuck directly to the wall. So you see the actual wall of the gallery through it, and then I essentially just removed the focal point, and it became like an object, and it was, just to remind the viewer that a photograph really is just ink on paper that can be manipulated. So these are just some more images of this show. I also just want to say that I apologize in advance because I got a little overambitious and I have a lot of slides, so we'll just get through them as quickly as possible, but also in a very efficient way. So again, using these fundamental elements of photography, using a light box, using things that maybe look like grain, or but also elements of nature that I just sort of manipulate and cut and scar. And this, you can see the title is called Overlook, which is typically something that's very wide and expansive, but then I just shifted the perspective and turned it into textures and colors more so than an actual portal into another space. When I was in grad school, I also did a residency at Hot Springs National Park, which, fun fact about that park, it was actually the first land that was protected by the federal government in 1832. So before Yosemite, before Yellowstone, Hot Springs was protected because of the water that was full of minerals and said to have healing qualities. And I was there for a few weeks, and it's not a big park, so I really walked the same trails over and over again. And so I made a print, and I took it back to the same place, back to its origin, and then I put the image in the water and just kind of let it happen, and then I made a GIF of it, so you can kind of see the photograph and then the actual space that was represented. Again, just playing with the frame, kind of removing that element, and these are just tiny little pieces of clouds that are backed with construction paper that reflect off the white wall, kind of an artificial color, again, adding more objectness to the landscape. And this is a detail of it. This piece on the rock collection is probably one of the favorite pieces I've ever made. In grad school, you have to take a lot of history classes, and I got really frustrated when we were learning about Joseph Kossuth's 3-in-1 chairs, and it's essentially a play on representation, and then I ended up making a piece that's very similar to it, and I don't know why, but I did. But it's really, poking at these fundamentals of photography about replication, the overproduction of images and scale, all of these elements really just sort of play on the medium of photography. And it's 3 pieces that are one, it's all the same rock. The stack on the pedestal is called 1,000 Rocks, and it's 1,000 Xerox copies of the same image. And the viewers were invited to take one as part of the participatory element of our sort of consumption of nature. Just some more install shots. Then I had kind of a series within a series called Geometric Landscapes. And I made about 10 of them, and they were like these beautiful images. And then using a laser cutter, I cut and scored these perfect shapes, and then I placed them back on the original photograph and then rephotographed them. I will say in my work, I sometimes break the frame and break the two-dimensional aspects of it, but I also somehow return to the photograph, because that to me is just the most important in my practice. So there's a few of them in here. This one still remains to be my favorite. And again, just kind of playing on the shapes that are in the actual photograph, light, shadow, all of these fundamental aspects of photography. And here's just the installation. And sometimes, hiking or walking or being in any sort of natural environment, I often found, like even in the back trails of any national park, I still seem to find trash. And I always ask my question, like, how did it get here and why is it here? And that question I've continued to use in my practice with things like this. I want the viewer to look at this and be like, oh, why is this like this? And then maybe have a progressive thought of some sort of manipulation of nature in and of itself. Horizon line is also a very fundamental element of landscape photography. And I read this article once about Ansel Adams and how extraordinary it was how when he started to photograph Yosemite that he did this revolutionary thing and dropped the horizon line to the bottom third of the frame, which now it seems like such a simple thing, but it really just opened up the sky and it made everything so much more grand, if you will. And so just kind of playing on the horizon line and shifting it completely, putting it on the ground so it's not on the wall, and then kind of making it more about texture and tone and things like that. Just some more install shots of that. And it's just paper on the ground. Another element of photography that I played with once, probably won't do it again, but is focus. I had a video of an image going in and out of focus, and it really, like the image just became like a color study, and then it came back into focus, and it was kind of this, again, a play on the fundamentals of the medium of photography. So here's another install shot. Okay, so fast forward a few years, and this is the body of work that's actually in Carbondale right now, and it's called The Nature of Representation. It somehow sticks with me more than I realize, but the subtitle is Evidence and Metaphor, and I began this body of work by asking the question again, what might nature look like in 50 years or 100 years? What might it look like if maroon bells no longer exist? Like, what would that do? What would that just look like in general? So I started playing around with some alternative ways of manipulating the photographic print. Again, treating it as an object, not as a portal into another place. That can also give the illusion that land and nature are untouched. I think that's really at the core of my work, is to make sure that viewers realize that our actions and our true, fundamental beliefs of consumerism, of how we think about sustainability and convenience, those are kind of at the core of what I think about. And so I really wanted to, again, break that expectation of what a photograph of nature should look like, and then think about what things might look like in the future. So I started to use household chemicals to alter the print, and this is a photograph of maroon bells, and I wiped away the mountain range with a Clorox wipe, and so you're just left with the silhouette of where the bells would be. And someone also mentioned, they're like, I've had a few people think that I did all this digitally, which is not true. It's all done with manipulation of the actual print and the paper. And then some people think that I've done these digitally, and I have to say that is also not the case, because I don't like working with digital manipulation. I don't feel part of the process, so I very much always work with paper and ink, obviously. Here's just a detail. You can kind of see some white marks up close, but the ink just comes right off with Clorox, so yeah. This was done using bleach, And this is about 13 by 19 inches, but I just kind of set up shop outside and sprayed bleach. I used a bunch of different chemicals, again, just to remove part of the ink on the image, just to kind of leave the imprint of what it would look like if it didn't exist, and also challenge what a photograph can communicate. This is simply with Windex. I just sprayed it right on the paper, and it drips down, and just kind of puddled at the bottom. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I got happy fingers. Detail. Other chemicals were denatured alcohol. That was the big one to the far side. There's a close-up of it. But just dumping chemicals on top of the print and then just swirling it around. This one is probably the one I'm most proud of. I worked really hard to get a dripping effect that I wanted, and I found what worked best was toilet bowl cleaner. So that's what I used for this image, and just really sort of got those long, droopy, thick lines that I was looking for. And again, just kind of using the photograph as a metaphor for human consumption and use, and kind of making the viewer, or at least presenting an opportunity to the viewer for them to think about, why these scars are here, why is the ink removed, and how that might affect how they think about the future. Here's another detail of that one. Laundry detergent on the right, bleach on both of the other two. Is very interesting how bleach reacted very differently depending on the ink, and the weather conditions outside too. So I did want to talk a little bit about my time in Ireland. I was very grateful for the opportunity to go and complete a residency at the Burren College of Art in the month of November. And I was there. It was a very different experience. A lot of my work previously, it touches on the American West and how we experience land or nature in that capacity. And when I was in Ireland, I didn't have a car. I was forced to walk everywhere, which changed my perspective enormously, and it really changed the way I photographed. I kind of started with the idea that I wanted to take portraits of nature rather than these grand, expansive views. And obviously, Ireland looks very different than it does here. So this is where the school was. There was a castle. It's kind of cool. But it's such a special place. A husband and wife decided that they wanted to start a college that was specifically for artists, and they bought the property and just sort of like built building after building as they could. And the castle actually makes it a historical site, so other visitors could come. People got married there. It was quite the scene. But it's a lot of their students focus more on ecology and art and things like that. So it was a very appropriate place for me to go. But like I said, I walked every day, and I kind of took that. If you remember the piece that I showed, the GIF, where I was walking the same trails over and over again, I kind of took that same mentality here, and I walked the same trail almost every single day I was there, and every day it was different. Like the light was different, or sometimes they mowed things, and I would see very different textures or different plants and things like that. And I felt like I was so much more connected. It was a much more intimate relationship that I felt just because I was on foot the whole time. I wasn't pulling up in a parking lot and driving and going on a curated trail. I could literally walk through any field I wanted to, and people in Ireland, they want you to. They want you to experience their beautiful landscape. So that's kind of just what I did. And it was an amazing time, and I don't know what will come of these images. I don't know if they will be manipulated like the other ones will, but I also feel a very different relationship to them, almost like I don't want to mess them up in some way. So that, to me, is an interesting difference between the two. But, yeah, it's just a very different place. And I really enjoyed my time there. And I highly recommend, if you get an opportunity to do a residency, it really, even a short one, it can change your practice immensely. So, and to me, that doesn't even look like Ireland, but I assure you it is. Yeah, just I think I shot, in landscape photography, you always want to have like this great long depth of field. And I think I shot every image at such a large aperture because I just approached it as a portrait rather than this large scene that we're used to here in the West. But it's so beautiful. And then, again, experimenting with focus. I think I said I wasn't going to do that, but then here I did it again. Yeah. Anyway, they're almost done. So these are just some of my studio shots. I kind of started playing with layering images on top of each other. I'm really fascinated by collage. And part of that is because of being here at Anderson Ranch. I was introduced to this whole new world of collage techniques that I probably will continue to do throughout my practice. And then I also printed some images from the West and then combined them with images from Ireland, which was very interesting because it just seems unreal. But yeah, that's it, the end.
Thank you, Esther. Great talk. Also, I wanted to let you know that after our next artist speaks, we will open up for Q&A. So if you have questions, just hold them till then, and then we'll have two of our interns with microphones, and you can put your hand up, and they will bring you a microphone, and then you can ask your question. Our next artist tonight is Emma Senft. Emma is an artist and furniture maker working in a combination of traditional craft processes and unconventional materials. Her work explores the interaction between our bodies and the built environment. Emma has been a studio fellow at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship and an artist in residence at Anderson Ranch Art Center. She has exhibited at galleries across the U.S. and Canada, and she's currently pursuing her MFA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please welcome Emma.
Cool, thank you. Oh.
Do you want me to exit out of this?
Yes, or, well, yeah, you're here. Thank you. Cool, thanks. Ooh, I won't look at that. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm an artist and a furniture maker, and I have been based in Montreal for the last decade or so, and at the moment I am doing my MFA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so I have a bit of a split home base right now. And I'm just going to say this, we did some tests before in the tech check, so Kevin said that you could hear me okay with this mask on. If not, just let me know, and I can take it off. So I like to start with this slide or something like it as a point of departure, a bit of background. I have a BFA that I focused primarily on printmaking from NASCAD University. And in the first couple of years out of that BFA, my practice was really focused on drawing. And so I like the parallels. I mean, I think there's interesting parallels here in kind of like visual texture and surface with some of the work that I will show. But also these drawings were really where I found my entry point to really time-consuming, detailed, meticulous work, and I had been looking for that entry point, so I like it as a starting point. And then a few years out from undergrad, I went back to school to an industry-oriented program. So I have like a trade or a vocational diploma, and that's in cabinet making. And that's really where I built my foundation of knowledge in woodworking and where I fell in love with that material and those processes. So in 2018, I did a studio fellowship at the Center for Furniture Craftsmanship in Maine, a really lovely place. And because I had been taking custom commissions and contracts, I really wanted this opportunity to kind of like focus on developing my work and my voice and kind of pushing my aesthetic. And I had been carving a lot, so I knew that I wanted to make a piece of furniture that's centered carving in some way. So, I mean, this has a beech kind of like body or carcass, and then these doors are carved basswood with this composition laid out in kind of stepped planes of these shapes and ridges interacting and the variation in texture. And the door, instead of kind of having 4 doors that swing open, normally the doors kind of fold inwards and out towards you. And the kind of like pleasant surprise for me of this was that it kind of animates the surface as it moves towards you, but keeps this continuity between the lines and the forms. And so while I was working towards this credenza and trying to kind of take the blurry, grainy idea in my head into reality, I did a lot of testing or test carving. And this was one of the first pieces where I felt like, oh, I'm interested in this unto itself, not just, but beyond incorporating it into my furniture, I'm interested in this as a standalone idea and piece. So I pursued the panel form into a larger series. And the motivations behind this work are in part an interest in light and subtlety. These pieces depend a lot on the space that they're in and how they're lit and the height of the viewer and how you move around it. And I'm interested in kind of this thought of texture as atmosphere, kind of the way that, like white noise has a texture to it or is kind of palpable. So these are, in a sense, a process of translating something sensorial or ephemeral into something material. And process-wise, so actually the workshop that I'm teaching this week, we're going to be looking at this, and so you should all come up near the end of the week and see what my students do. But process-wise, I tend to draw by hand at full scale, and then I digitize that so that I can put the wood panel on the CNC, so it's a computer-controlled machine that will cut out those planes for me more quickly and precisely and safely than me doing it. So it kind of like removes that waste and establishes the planes and lines. And then I go in and hand carve, because hand carving has this kind of expressive approach, this kind of responsiveness to the material. And I can get this line quality and this meandering surface that I'm interested in. And every time I carve, I kind of think that I'm about building a vocabulary or adding to my toolkit, both in the marks and in these kind of fields of textures that I'm creating. And if you think about mark making in a like drawing or painting sense, I'm interested in the act of carving or in the gouge marks individually as this kind of mark making. And so in these two, you can also see in that like kind of middle plane, the shallower carved planes, there's also this layer of grease pencil on that. So I'm kind of like playing with that mark making with layering and density a second time. And so at the same time, I was interested in pulling these compositions and vocabulary into the furniture that I was making. And I made both of these during a residency at the ranch, which was really great. It was a really productive residency for me. So like quite literally on the left, I'm just translating that carved surface kind of onto the flat surface of a piece of furniture. And that table has different carvings on both ends. But on the right, I was more interested in kind of deconstructing these ideas and forms that I was working with and integrating them into the concept and the form of the mirror. And then I was starting to think about, branching out a little bit from panel form, maybe coming off the wall or becoming a little more three-dimensional. And this piece, this is so large, this piece is like 21, 24 inches in real life. But it still shares with those panels these varied textures and this contrast between curves and like more rigid geometries or lines. but the form underneath has become much more organic and kind of squirming. So thinking about where I'm going. And then as a part of this series, I set out to work really small for a series of them so that I could iterate more quickly and be more experimental and exploratory with my surfaces and with color. And this slide pretty much takes me up to the start of the pandemic. I had a show in February 2020, and then I got back to Montreal, and we were locked out of our studio buildings as non-essential workers. And so by the time I got back into my studio building, it was basically in time to pack it up and move to Wisconsin. So I like these slides back to back. There is a little bit of a sense of continuity to them, even though they must be like 6 to 10 months apart. But carrying that serial desire to iterate really quickly and work smaller was really helpful for me in landing in grad school. I'm setting up a relationship to a new studio, and I had limited access because of the pandemic. So I undertook this series, this kind of ever ongoing series, I think, and something that emerged for me that felt important was the kind of strong relationship this scale had to the hand, that relationship to either like a tool or something that is meant to be held and handled. And I had been interested in tactility in my surfaces before, and so this felt like an important way or a natural way to try to figure out how and why. So really thinking about wrapping those surfaces around form and also starting to think about posture in an abstract way. And these are quite small, I should say, they're both about this tall. And the other thing that working serially allows me to do is kind of explore like an intuitive and raw sense of gesture that I've always been attracted to, but I'm always kind of concerned or like struggled to consider enough. Like, is it art? Is it done? And so working in a series allows me to kind of push both edges of that like highly crafted, heavily worked surface with something a little more casual or immediate that kind of holds on to that initial original energy or gesture. So this is just, it's like a weathered log that has this line carved in and around it, so the surfaces all connect, and it kind of maps this form in three-dimensional space as a line, and where I've carved in the kind of like fresh, pinky basswood subtly contrasts with the weathered gray of the outside in texture and color. And so the next step of that series in tactility and hand relationship led me to thinking about touch and isolation. So I'm in a new country in a pandemic, living alone for the first time in a long time, and I've moved across a closed border, so I'm separated from my family and community. And these works are about isolation and intimacy and touch. So we tend to reduce touch to something sexual, but there are so many like platonic types of touch of varying degrees of intimacy. And so rather than the kind of busyness of the like previous carved sculptures that maybe prompted touch or connoted tactility, and these, the negative space, become records of my body and my touch. And so likewise, this is a larger piece that's been carved and bleached, and then the notches carved away to reveal the unbleached wood underneath fit my legs in a seated position from two directions. So there's two sets of indents. And so kind of a little bit of this mix of self-portraiture and this presence of like the empty half of the piece, of the interaction. I tried to set a timer. Oops, I have no idea how I'm doing for time, sorry. Okay, so this project is from this past fall, most recently, For Your Protection. I wanted to incorporate plexiglass into my work in response to the plexiglass barriers that had become very common in public spaces and in shops all over in the past few years. And so I altered the surfaces of the plexi to create patterns of visual obstruction in this goal of kind of creating like a constant refocusing in the viewer between your awareness of the surface in front of you and the view through. And these are, I mean, it's nice to view these with someone because you really get that experience of the barrier between you, and also these surfaces are much more kind of, their obstruction and activation is much more visible with like not a white wall behind them. And the other thing in this that I started in this work is kind of drawing on knowledges and memories of the language of furniture and the built environment, but reframing it and applying it in a really pared down way. And then this material, this like pinkish material that you see creating kind of these like drawn lines in space, is a foam insulation. And so again, pulling in that language of kind of construction materials and the built environment. So this body of work is really new, and I'm still processing it and learning how to talk about it, but here goes. I might read a couple spots of my show statement to help. But this series came out of an encounter I had at the Ace Hardware, my favorite Ace Hardware in Madison, where I spotted this pipe insulation in an unusual color. Usually this stuff comes in kind of like gray-black. And I was really taken with it, so I brought a piece back to my studio to play with it and manipulate it. And what emerged for me was kind of something visceral and bodily and odd, very awkward. And so combined with wood and plexiglass and epoxy, these works kind of move between like a gestural line drawing in space and bodies that interact and or merge with the built environment. So I'm cut like on the right, or sorry, left, you can kind of see like I'm cutting darts or notches out, and I'm gluing those voids closed to kind of interrupt a smooth curve and redirect the line. And then on the right, I'm kind of taking this woodworking background and like figuring out how to do joinery and foam to make this form hold. And the piece on the right really prompted an interest in sag for me, this idea of sag and gravity. So I'm interested in the structural limit of a material and this kind of conversation of how far I can push or pull or cantilever a material to a point where it starts to buckle or sag or collapse. And can I hold it in that moment to kind of show that the force of tension or gravity? Drape and sag I think of as this kind of universal experience of gravity on our bodies and on the built and natural world. Okay, I'm going to check my notes here. So my interest in these works has focused towards presenting something bodily. As abstract bodies, my hope is that these pieces provoke both intellectual and felt connections with the viewer. I know photography is really hard. This material in person is like quite odd. It has like a bit of a sheen and a skin to it. And like my own relationship to the body and like the body itself, the pieces can be visceral, intriguing, humorous, repulsive all at once. The works also present a location for inherited relationships and attitudes towards our bodies. So the point is not illusion. I'm not, this doesn't really look like flesh or skin, but I'm interested in pursuing this kind of fleeting recognition before that second of like, wait, what is that? My goal is to consider the body as a site or vehicle for sensuality, pain, trauma, humor, disgust, pleasure, tenderness, nurture, distress, attraction, awkwardness, joy, glee, restriction, shame, horror, presence, disconnect, empowerment, discomfort, psychosomatic manifestations, and placebo effects. So I did a lot of reflecting while I made this work, obviously. Through abstraction and gesture and material, I'm trying to explore the body kind of as an entity of nuance and complexity. And the wood components are integral to this work. So I don't see them as like a mount or a stand, but I see like the whole piece as an intersection of languages or worlds, kind of enacting like this joinery between the practical and the impractical. So this is an install shot of my MFA qualifier show that I had this winter. Often when people enter my studio, they talk about how fleshy this material is and how it folds and wrinkles and in color. And I want to acknowledge race in this work, though I don't really have an answer to that right now, but I know that it is like a present consideration. This line of work came out of like a playful, visceral reaction and curiosity to a specific found material. And as a white person, I found the kind of like offish, sickly, almost related to my skin tone compelling, but I don't want to present a kind of default, singular, white-centered representation of flesh or skin. And part of this is figuring out what this work is still. Like, is this me? Is this about working out my relationship to my body, or am I interested in bodies and the body more generally? But I'm also aware that through lots of conversations I've had that these read quite like violent or tortured to some people. There's a lot of kind of piercing or the way pieces intersect or like are held in tension or captured. And so I want to be really mindful of that and tread kind of with nuance and care. Yeah. So that is, I guess I said that. That's my MA show from this year. And then I want to end with a messy shot of one of the walls in my studio currently. And I've been thinking a little bit about coming back to these carved panels because it's such an ingrained language in me. And so I've been trying to think of these, like these four on the bottom, kind of as drawings, as something a little like looser and less precious and a space to experiment, rather than kind of like a finished sculpture that I'm working towards. And as I returned to these, obviously I began to see how the foam work had affected kind of my line and my interest in line and my quality and that interest in sag and gravity that comes through. And then on the top, I started weaving this past semester. And so these are just some of my like earliest samples, but that same interest in materiality and dimensionality kind of coming out of the cloth and that buckling point or that sagging point and what happens at varying lengths. And always in like all these recent works, interested in this kind of like awkwardness or physical discomfort and this leaving of flaws. So that's it.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Esther. Really grateful to have such wonderful artists sharing their work with us tonight. Does anyone have any questions? Well, I have a question. Oh, okay, we'll go to your question first.
First presenter, what kind of a camera did she use?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello again. So shooting, everything was pretty much shot digitally. I have a wide variety of like full frame, mirrorless cameras that I just, depends on what I have with me at the time. But some of the images are composite because I really wanted to have scale as an option, and so I would take multiple images and then stitch them together so I can have large prints if I needed to. So any other questions while I'm up here? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a question.
It's hot potato.
Emma, and
My question was, I was sort of struck at the very beginning how you talked about animating the side of the, I mean, with the carving and the lines, and I thought that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition between like this solid, very stable looking piece of furniture and the idea of animating a 3D object. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. And this is on.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, do you want me to go up front?
No, you can.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I have so many thoughts. I'm trying to think of which way to take my brain. I mean, I think that there is going the route of like thinking of that as furniture and thinking about how furniture is like interactive and therefore has this kind of like liveness of performance, right? And that is a piece of furniture with moving parts. And so the other thing about that piece is that there are these kind of like handles that come out of those doors. So they're like very clear affordances. But I think that thinking of that piece and like furniture in general, that room for dynamism is like really interesting. And that's part of my interest in furniture is kind of the importance of that like physical interaction and its relationship to our bodies and how we, like the place it takes in our daily lives. And so I think that, I don't know if this is really answering your question, but that sense of animation of like lives they have and liveliness seems really interesting to me.
Well, and I was thinking about like how you, like this idea of almost of activation.
Yes.
You're activating the piece, but I often think of activating as performance.
Yeah.
Activating the piece itself. And so I thought that was just a really interesting way to conceptually think of it.
I just gave my 3D class, their final project was to make an activated object. And yeah, I mean, I was really trying to talk about this sense of like, when is something activated? Do you have to be wearing it or in contact with it? Like, so that it's not just a light switch that you turn on or off. Like, when is it, if you put it down, does it stop? And I think that, I don't know the answer for that credenza, but maybe there's potential that it carries on.
Do we have other questions? Oh, I don't, okay.
No?
No, you're going to keep, you and I will keep that mic.
Sorry.
There you go.
I have one for Esther, actually. Do you think your work in Ireland, where you had a closer relationship being on foot to the landscape, did that change your relationship with how you looked at your previous work with these much broader horizons?
I don't think so. Maybe not yet. I think that the experience that I had in Ireland versus the experience in the West were so vastly different that like memory associated with those images stays in that sort of bookend, and then I have this like new perspective to work with. I hope that if I went back to some of those places in the West, that maybe I would think about them differently. But yeah, I think that work, I made the images so long ago, and then my relationship with them in this actual spaces have kind of have distance between them. And I think that if I were to go back, I would, to use your word, activate me in a different way.
Awesome, thank you.
So this question is kind of for both artists. Both had bodies of work that involved mark making, and I'm curious about the process about how that came to be with the different pieces of work. Where was there sketchbooks? Was there drawings out? Was it just trial and error and experimenting? Either or both of you could answer, that'd be great.
I'll go first, since I have the mic in my hand. I would say that my sketching is just having a lot of photographs in my studio, and it all started with cutting, and I would just have, prints and prints and prints of the same thing, and just start cutting them in different ways, manipulating them in different ways, and that kind of became how I sketched. And then sometimes I would, like I mentioned, I would go back to like re-photographing those things, but my process was very active. I don't like drawing. It's not for me, even though in school it was forced upon me. But I definitely am a very like quick process person, and so I would just have like 5 prints of the same thing and work with all of them in different ways, and then those became sketches that then became developed for bigger pieces.
I'm gonna jump off something you said about like not liking drawing, and I do like drawing, but I don't think of myself as an image maker. I really struggle with that kind of, even though like for a woodworker, my work is very pictorial, and I think that comes out of the mark making. And when I'm drawing by hand or anything, like the texture, visual texture and mark making is always feels like the guiding factor. And so part of how the carved series in particular developed is, I think I referred to it as kind of this building of vocabulary, but it is really this building up of experiments and kind of like trial and error combinations, response to material, like really responding to the wood as I'm carving, which sounds really romantic, but, and also that I think that there are kind of like layers of mark in those, in the way that like often those carvings that I do have ridges, and that is kind of a different kind of line quality, so, or like the way that planes transition. So I'm at least subconsciously thinking about that mark in a kind of variety of ways.
I think if we have time for one more.
Hey Esther, I really enjoyed your presentation and I love the horizontal lines piece, but my question is, have you ever done like wall size, like wallpaper, and then did the toilet blow dripping? I think that'll be stunning to see it like as a whole wall installation.
Yeah, come see me in 3 months and I'll let you know how it goes. It's next on my list to do like much larger scales of the smaller ones that I showed. It's not easy to work with that kind of, it seems like something you'd literally under your sink, but I did about 10 of those to get what I wanted. And I definitely think that scale is going to be part of like the next phase of that body of work and like really blowing it up.
Man, I could see that like in a high-end hotel suite.
Yeah,
like, really
actually, you're not the first person to say that. That's quite interesting. So
I'll help you throw the toilet bowl cleaner if you need any help.
you'll be my first call.
Emma, also one more question. Have you ever thought of using glass in your stunning, the cabinets and stuff? Have you ever incorporated glass into your work?
I haven't. I've definitely thought about it. Do you mean, are you thinking like in a particular direction? Like, are you thinking like panes or like that I would buy the glass, or do you mean like glass working myself?
Panes, as far as panes, yeah, just to give it more dimension, and so because like the carving on it is like incredible. That's so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely think like that work with plexiglass and some of the kind of like larger considerations of space that I'm thinking about right now. I'm interested in sightlines, and so I think that glass would be like a really necessary avenue to explore in that.